Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Brendan Burns Show. Joining me today is Alex Doman, who is an author, entrepreneur, public speaker, and product creator with more than 25 years of experience in leadership in the brain, health, neurotechnology, and therapeutic music markets. He's been interviewed by NBC, CBS, ABC, The Wall Street Journal. I could go on and on with all the people who he has talked to. And the coolest thing is Alex is third generation in a family of pioneers dedicated to improving brain performance. He's the founder and CEO of Advanced Brain Technologies, founder and chief product officer of Vital Neuro, founder and chief scientist of Sleep Genius, founder of the Movement Program, and the best-selling co-author of Healing at the Speed of Sound, which Alex was so gracious to send me a signed copy of, which I have right here. Awesome book, and I really want to talk more about this. In addition to being a blogger, host of the Advanced Brain podcast, which include guests from New York Times bestsellers to health personalities and more, Alex was named one of the top 50 human behavior experts to watch and has trained thousands of medical, therapeutic, and education professionals on brain-related topics. Alex, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Brendan. Thanks.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm just get fired up reading that bio, and why don't we just put that on hold and go back to the top. So where are you from? Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into all this stuff?
Well, I'm here with you today from Ogden, Utah. I've been in Utah for 25 years now. So half my life is here. So I think we'll call this home. Before that, I was at Angelino living in Southern California and had made my way there from Colorado and Philadelphia. But Utah's home.
That's great. So enjoying the West Coast vibes. I love it. And in the bio mentioned that you're third generation in this field. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your grandfather or your grandparents and your parents and their involvement with this work.
Yeah. So my grandfather was a physiatrist. So he was a medical doctor that was a specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation. And he and his brother and their colleagues in the 1940s started to pioneer brain injury treatment protocols and protocols for stroke rehabilitation, coma rehabilitation. And the basic premise was, and still is today in the family, that we all have unlimited potential. And if we empower and harness the power of the brain's plasticity and afford people the opportunities to achieve that potential, then they will grow closer to it. So it's the perspective that we are this, inside of our cranium, we have this beautiful piece of clay that's malleable, that's called our brain. And if we give that brain the right opportunities, the right environment, it can change and progress and develop. So from a brain injury or somebody without a brain injury to being a peak performer, our family's just been committed to helping people move along that continuum of potential in their life. My dad and his sister and their cousins were second generation. My father started a company called the National Association for Child Development, which has been running for 40 years now. And I joined him in 1993, doing research on therapeutic applications of music and sound with his clients, which were children and adults and are today, with autism and ADHD and Down syndrome and cerebral palsy and gifted and normal and everything in between. And just really developed a passion for the work, and I'm here doing it today.
That's fantastic. It reminds me, when I see third generation, it reminds me of my background, because my grandfather went to Cornell Law School in upstate New York and was a practicing lawyer. My father went to Cornell Law School in upstate New York and was a practicing lawyer. I went to Cornell Law School in upstate New York, and I did it for 3 months and I was out. I didn't even take the bar. I'm a trained lawyer. I have a JD. I use it when writing contracts and with my business. But I said, I'm out. You probably took the wiser road. It sounds like you followed in their footsteps. Was it ever kind of up for debate? Did you consider going in a different direction?
I was in a different direction. I got pulled back in. So I was very kind of entrepreneurial and doing different things. And in fact, at the time that I took the call to help my father, he had had a health crisis. And he had had a massive heart attack when he was 45 years old.
Wow.
and the family's work was in jeopardy. So I was in telecommunications. I was in the mobile phone industry in LA at the time, and having a lot of fun and doing well, and preaching the gospel of mobile phone technology, and really enjoying that. And Dad had a health issue, and I moved to Utah to help. So it was really kind of I thought I ultimately would do it, but definitely had to pave my own path before I did.
Interesting. I want to get back to that and kind of what you stepped into and how it evolved from there. But just to go back a little bit, what was your childhood like growing up in a family that knew so much about the brain? I grew up in a childhood where we knew so much about law. So at the dinner discussions, we talk about the Supreme Court and what's going on legalese-wise. I'm really curious how this applied to maybe your perspective as a child of this awareness.
Well, that awareness started very young. One of my dad's early positions was as a clinical director of United Cerebral Palsy in Delaware County outside of Philadelphia. And my grandfather had started that particular chapter of UCP as medical director. And I bring that up because I would go to summer school and participate in the preschool at United Cerebral Palsy as a typically developing kid, in there with, you would have thought of it as an inclusion model with kids with autism, kids with Down syndrome, kids with CP. So to me, they were just kids. So I didn't see them as different. I just saw them as people, and I think, which they are. They're not different than any of us. They just have different abilities at present. So I think that the perspective was such that we don't know what anyone is capable of doing. Each one of us is exceptional as who we are, and that you develop an empathy and a compassion for people, and you realize the tremendous capacity that we may have comparatively, and it really makes you value what you have. In the same vein, I was a guinea pig for a lot of the methods, because what our family does is develop techniques and evaluate techniques to enhance brain performance. So that means activities and exercises and different technologies and programs get thrown at you. So you're kind of like this blank canvas, and my father would paint me with these activities as a little kid. So, I was a beneficiary of the work as well as being surrounded by it. But, it was always conversations kind of around kids and how to help kids, and being around that just becomes kind of a natural part of who you are.
It's amazing, because in a totally unrelated vein, I study empathy, compassion, unconditional acceptance, and love a lot as someone who does life coaching and speaking on topics such as psychology and happiness. And you got to experience that. And I would also add gratitude to the mix just from this experience. And so going through that childhood and also knowing what you know about the brain, if someone came to you and said, hey, I'm having a hard time at work dealing with coworkers or interpersonal relationships, or I'm having a hard time in my romantic relationship or even my relationship with myself because I lack empathy, self-compassion, these topics, what would be your take on that?
Well, I'm a student of personal development myself, and I think that started with the family work, but I'm always trying to sharpen the saw. And I kind of reduce it back to the very fundamentals, right? When we have a struggle, in our life, how can we just step back and be present in this moment, and really embrace where we are and not judge the moment today, but just be here and filter out the extraneous and the judgments that may go around everything that's happening. And if I make a recommendation to people, I start just with a bunch of questions, Brendan. I'm really curious about what's happening with lifestyle choices. What are people doing to practice good self-care? What's their sleep hygiene and their sleep regime? What are they doing in terms of how they're, providing nutrients to their body? Are they doing anything toxic to their body? What are they doing to manage stress and to move their body? So it's really a matter of, going in and asking what's going on through these means, and you pick up a lot. And as you pick that up, you can then, talk to people, and they can problem solve for themselves how to get out of those situations just through the conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. And I really felt that as you were just sharing. It kind of put me in a more present state right now. So thank you for that. Let's go back to your this high flying tech or telecom exec in LA, and your dad has the health crisis, and it's time to shift gears a little bit. What happened? What role did you start to take on?
Well, the situation, he got sick in 92. I got a phone call actually on the way into the office. He had just had a heart attack.
Wow.
And I got on my mobile phone time and booked a flight to LAX to go back to New Jersey, where he was. He was out there at his chapter seeing kids, and spent 2 weeks there. And not knowing, and I remember, Brendan, there was a moment where we were like creating a will before he went in for open heart surgery. And things got like real in that moment. And, trying to, he was building a home. He had his assistant who operated the business with him, working to hold things together. And I had served on the board of the organization, but wasn't active in it, day to day, because I was in Utah and I was in California. So, I went into problem solving mode with him. How do we just take care of business and keep things running? At the time, the organization was completely dependent on his time seeing clients to thrive and to function. That's how the company made revenue. And after he recovered and went home, the conversations were around, how do we extend this business beyond him? How do we take this incredible knowledge that he has and do some knowledge transfer to other people that can do the work, under his supervision? Mm-hmm. And I spent a year kind of in an exit strategy to transition from Los Angeles to Utah, because the organization couldn't support me financially. Fortunately, I was doing well in LA and had some time to make the transition when I came. And I moved to Utah, got involved with NACD, and we began to work on the day-to-day operations and the efficiencies of that, but then developed a training program to train neurodevelopmental consultants under my father's supervision to learn his work. And we spent 5 years trying to do that, and built the business up quite nicely, got the business healthy. He got healthy, happy to say he's 71 today.
Oh, that's great.
Never been. They gave him 5 to 10 years to live after that open heart surgery.
Wow.
So, here we are so many years later, and he's thriving and doing well and continuing his work. And now my younger brother, who's 20 years my junior, is his COO and running the business operations and continuing to move that forward. So what we did laid a good foundation, and the work is continued and will perpetuate beyond over time. So for us, that's a win.
That's great, and yeah. I'm really happy to hear that, and that he had a good recovery, and that you were able to take this business and keep it going. And so what would be like a target client example, if you could take a case study for that business and then maybe share what your father or someone working there would do, and then maybe extrapolate how the listeners could learn from it, and maybe there's something they could do to improve their brain function or their
typically when people go to my father, they've been everywhere else, right?
Okay.
The doctors have failed, the therapists have failed, the schools have failed them, and they're not getting where they need to go. And I think one of the challenges are that the doctors, the schools, and the therapists aren't completely equipped necessarily to help everybody. That we all kind of see the world through our individual lens, right? And red is red and green is green, and I may see different shades than you, but I have a certain perspective when I see that color. And what happens is, if say somebody sees an individual with Down syndrome, their understanding of Down syndrome is their experience of Down syndrome. It's what they've seen of Down syndrome. And that may be a nonverbal individual that's low functioning, maybe can do some low level vocational skills, will never live independently, will never drive a car, will never go to college. And that becomes, your perspective, right, of Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. However, when you've worked with thousands of individuals with Down syndrome, and you have seen them be highly verbal, work meaningful jobs, have driver's licenses and drive cars, and go to college successfully through your work, Down syndrome looks very different to you. And I think that's one of the brilliant parts of the work, and that experience and the exposure is, when we do what works, the potential is infinite. So what would happen, and happens at NACD, is an individual comes in for an evaluation that does what I call a functional brain map. By a functional brain map, observing behaviors and movement and activities of daily living and life to evaluate how the brain is receiving sensory information, how it's expressing information, how well it's processing auditory and visual information, how somebody behaves, their academic performance, their nutritional regime or deficits. And then a personalized program is created, a game plan, a playlist, if you will, of activities that are done daily at a certain frequency, intensity, and duration to capitalize on the brain's plasticity. And these activities are done according to what time is available in somebody's schedule. The more deficits they have, the more time is needed to produce that change. I can speak to this very personally because I grew up on a program. My children have been on a program, and I do an active program with my 8-year-old son, who's a typically developing kid, to enhance his performance. So there are exercises that exercise visual processing, auditory processing, language and communication, movement, right? Physical activity, nutritional program, behavioral management program, auditory and visual based training paradigms. So the individuals are evaluated, they have their custom program. The family is trained to implement that program. They have a coach that oversees that training for them. They work it daily and report back, and every 3 to 4 months they get reevaluated, and you change the plan and you keep moving forward. You achieve one set of goals and you move on to the next goals. And if you're not achieving those goals, you evaluate as to why, and you modify the game plan. And you continue this movement forward. And it was through that work that Advanced Brain Technologies, we incubated inside of NACD to develop new technologies and programs as part of these therapies, to take them beyond the NACD clientele and to take them to people that aren't part of the organization and get them exposed to the principles of the work through software programs and music listening therapies to help advance their potential. So that's what we're doing at Advanced Brain.
That's great. I'm curious what the biggest differences are in a program between someone who's young and has Down syndrome, for example, and someone who's older and is performing at a different level and says, hey, I want to be sharper, smarter, versus an athlete who wants to see a baseball better. Like, how different or similar are these programs?
Well, first of all, the one thing we all share in common is a brain. And brains have a certain way they function. They bring in sensory information, right? Sound, visual input, touch input, compression, vestibular input, smell and taste, right? So we have different channels into the brain, and we have different ways that we express that understanding. We write, we speak, we move, right? And we have cognition to act and think about what we're doing. So the fundamentals are the same, but it's the level of mastery that we have of these things. So if we're dealing with a child that has mobility issues, we may be teaching them to creep or crawl to prepare them to walk. But if we're dealing with somebody that's a peak performance athlete, we're then, kind of dialing in that last 1% of performance for them. So the challenges are very different. I'll take there's a case study I'll take as an example, but it's probably the most illustrative. It's a young woman. I can share her name because her story is very public. Her name's Jennifer Lindsay. And Jennifer was born with oxygen deprivation. So she had a hypoxia. She was deprived of oxygen when she was born. She had a very low APGAR score. On a scale of 1 to 10 of a healthy baby, she was a 1. She was blue. They weren't sure she was alive because she had had all this oxygen loss. She swallowed her meconium during birth and resulted in a brain injury. And her program, was very fundamental in the beginning, right? She was a brain injured child. And over time, as she developed and progressed, things got more and more complex for her. Now, what I can tell you is that, Jennifer is a young woman today who's a math master. She's a chess master and speaks multiple languages, is an opera singer and a violinist, and has just performed at the top level in all areas of her life as a performer and as an academic. But, an example of, going from basic movement activities to get her mobility going to when she was at such a high level of processing, my father was trying to figure out activities that could challenge her brain when her processing was better than his own, right? So it was things like playing chess without a chessboard present.
Wow.
You have to hold your positions, the opponent's positions, visualize that board.
Oh, and you just say like, I'm moving this one here, and
yeah. So these
Wow.
kind of things to take it up to another level. So I think it's about degrees, and you can think of it like weightlifting. You start at lower weights, fewer reps, and you build up and you build up and you build up as your strength builds up. And the same is true in the brain. You just upping the challenge because the brain's always up for more. The challenge with high functioning individuals is the margin of change becomes smaller and smaller, and the ability to move them to the next level becomes more and more difficult.
Yeah.
So it's harder actually with high performing individuals than with low functioning individuals.
Yeah, I have the same thing with my client. I mean, I like my high performing clients because they get it and they listen and they're easy to work with. But I'll say to them, all right, here's your sleep schedule. Here's your nutrition plan. Here's what you're going to do. Oh, I already do that. I already do that. I already do that. And you have to figure out what can you add value to them that they're not already doing.
Yeah. And it's hard. And it becomes these little micro adjustments that make the difference when they're at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of just brain health generally, we live in a world where we're abusing our technology and our smartphones. Average American watches 4 hours of TV a day. Obesity is at all-time highs. I'm sure there is a correlation between poor brain health, at least in some demographics or some areas. And I'm curious your thoughts on that and kind of what's the low-hanging fruit? What could listeners do, just sort of the easy things to get their brain health cleaned up?
Yeah, our diets are garbage, Brendan. I mean,
yeah.
Let's look at the world we've created today, right? I mean, we did this. Humanity did this to our planet and did this to ourselves, and we're breaking things down at an exceptional rate. Now, our awareness of it is also increasing at an exponential rate. But foundationally, there's a few things. Let's start with nutrition. Okay. We know that there are foods that are inflammatory to the body. And the most common culprits are carbs, right?
Yep.
And refined sugars.
Yeah.
So if we cut out the bread, we cut out processed food, we cut out fast food. If we don't buy things in a box and we eat whole foods, your life will change. Just starting there. And that's kind of a big leap for people to take. You know, if normally you're hitting McDonald's on the way to the office and Burger King for lunch and, whatever it might be, and we're looking for quick, easy, and convenient in our lives, eating whole foods isn't quick, easy, or convenient. You know, it takes some time to be present, to prepare, and to think about what we're doing. So I think we're not doing enough thinking about what goes into our body. And, I've been there too. I'm not perfect by any means, but I'm very conscious about my choices. And I know if I make the poor choices, what the consequences of those are going to be, in direct result. So diet's a biggie. Anything that we can do to reduce inflammation, which means stopping the bad foods, sugar, carbs, wheats, carbohydrate. If we get that out, fantastic. Then we start adding in avocados, extra virgin olive oil, almonds. We go for, good leafy greens, good colorful vegetables, low sugar fruits. And then we do things that increase the BDNF, which is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is important for the cellular health of our neurons and the interconnection of our neurons and the growth of new neurons in the brain that allow us to think and act and to function. Exercise is very important to that. Certain foods, including some of those that I've mentioned, are very useful. Doing hot, cold, thermogenic training. So heat and saunas, followed by, cold showers, for example, which is, first thing I did this morning when I got up. These kind of things can be super helpful. Sleep is kind of the next pillar. So I look at diet, then I look at sleep. So what's the sleep hygiene regime? And when are people going to bed? When are they waking up? What are they doing 2 hours prior to bed in terms of food intake, screen utilization? Have they made their bedroom a haven? Have they prioritized sleep in their life? So we look at those pieces. Then another pillar, we look at stress management. What are people doing to mitigate the stress in their life through diet, through exercise, through sleep, and in their daily practices? So these are, I think, things that aren't easy, but we understand them and they're accessible to us. And we're all capable of acting on changing the food we put into our body, how we move our body, and what we do, in terms of our sleep and our stress management. And it doesn't have to be costly. These things could be done affordably, and some are free. It's just different choices.
Yeah, that's very valuable. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, because you mentioned sleep, if you've studied anything along the lines of the functioning of the hippocampus and how getting more sleep translates into having more long-term memory retention. If that's something you've ever looked at.
Well, sleep, we've got a company called Sleep Genius. It's one of the companies that you mentioned. And what we do at Sleep Genius primarily is to help to regulate sleep function. And that primary regulator of sleep function is this suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay, so that's a center in the brain, which is the primary clock that we run on. Okay, it sets our circadian cycle. So this 24-hour body clock is super, super important to us. And if we can set that clock based on a regular sleep-wake cycle, then things like memory consolidation begin to improve. The increase of the brain-derived neurotropic factor, the cleansing of the brain, because we need sufficient quality sleep in order for the cerebral spinal fluid to move throughout the brain and to detoxify the brain when we're sleeping at night. And all of these things help with memory consolidation and retention. So one of the keys to that, and you brought up sleep hygiene earlier yourself, is that screen time. Keeping this away, try to keep that out of the bedroom.
Yep.
At night, right? Because when we've got the screens and the blue light that's emitted, that lowers our sleep hormone by up to 30%, melatonin. So when we have melatonin depleted, then the brain can't get to sleep. And what triggers melatonin production is darkness.
Mm.
Okay. And if we see light, the brain believes that it's day and it's time to be awake, and it's not producing as much melatonin.
Yeah, that's why casinos have no windows and they blast the lights, keep you awake.
That's right. They keep you sensory disoriented, right? You
Yeah.
also don't find a clock in a casino.
Yeah, and you'll find unlimited drinks.
Oh, yes.
I'm not a gambler, for listeners who are curious why I know so much about casinos.
Oh, yeah. How do you know so much about casinos?
Yeah. So I want to shift gears and get into the therapeutic music and the book. But the last question I just have sort of on this topic is dreams, and what your thoughts are on dreaming, and if that's something you look at or people should think about at all.
It's not really my area. I think the study of dreams is definitely fascinating. I don't remember a lot of my dreams, so it's not something heavily in my consciousness.
Right.
It's a question that comes up a lot, right? Because is what we're experiencing in a dream state, our processing of our unconscious. Are we trying to make sense of this fragmented life that we live? Are we trying to resolve issues? Is it important to us to dream? I don't know the answer to any of those questions. So,
yeah, I was just curious if it has come up for you. I know that I remember my dreams pretty well, and I've done a dream log, and I've talked about it with coaches, and we've analyzed it. I don't know if we've come to
what are your thoughts on it?
I think that for me, at least, my dreams are often very much a reflection of anxiety that I have. So if I'm having repetitive dreams, I can say, okay, this is something that I can bring to the conscious and process it and work on it in a therapeutic or in a personal development space. So it's almost like a barometer of what I may be neglecting emotionally or subconsciously, and allow me to bring it up and get it handled. Other times it's just sort of a healthy reflection of fears. And, it's like, I remember in my old job, I worked at a hedge fund, and on the weekends I would work on this business, which I've now launched full time. And I had a blog and I had an Instagram account, and I tried to keep them very separate. And I sort of had this unreasonable fear that if they found out about this at work, they would not only fire me, but hurt me or be really angry at me. And I would have this recurring dream of my boss, like either walking into my office and seeing everything, or coming in and saying, oh, what's this Instagram account? And so it's just, it's kind of like those dreams that a lot of children have, where they're in their dream, they get to school and it's the final exam and they're not ready, or they get to school and they don't have their pants on. So, it's an exaggerated
guilt around your side hustle.
Yeah, exactly. Guilt around my passion. And
yeah.
Anyway, it's fascinating. I feel like there isn't anything conclusive there, and I was just curious if you had any thoughts. But let's move over to I'm really curious, Healing at the Speed of Sound. What was the genesis of this book? And I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, so Genesis goes back to 2006 in Baden, Austria.
Okay.
I went over, a dear friend of mine who's on our scientific board, Vera Brandis, is a music medicine researcher who organizes a big conference called the Mozart and Science Congress in Austria. And every 2 years this goes on. And I was speaking there in 2006. And I had the pleasure to meet with another speaker who was an individual who was revered in the field. And we had corresponded. He lived in Boulder, Colorado. I was in Ogden, Utah. It's a 45-minute flight, over the Rockies to see one another. But we had never met, despite at that point I had been in the field for many, many years. And we had the opportunity to get introduced and have dinner together. And we really hit it off. There was a great rapport between us, and we had dinner a second night over there. And then I invited him over to keynote our conference in 2007. And he came to Park City and keynoted one of our conferences, and he had such a great time. He asked to come back and do it the next year. And we did it again in 2008. And over a late night drink, we were at this resort called the Zermatt in Midway, Utah. He told me about this book title that he had swimming around in his head, Healing at the Speed of Sound. I think that's a great book title. And I think that's a book you and I should write together.
Wow.
I said, really? And I said that because this man had written 21 books, New York Times bestseller called The Mozart Effect. He had popularized the idea of music for education and health and therapeutic benefits, and was really somebody I looked up to as one of the elders and the leaders in the field, and was incredibly humbled for that suggestion. And of course, I said, yes, let's write that book. And we went to work. And the idea was the Mozart Effect, had come out about a decade before. Things had really changed in the science of sound and in music, and the research, the peer-reviewed research. When he started, everything was very anecdotal, a lot of ancient wisdom and a lot of intuition, in the field. And that has formalized over the decades, and neuroscience has really embraced music as an area of study and to understand the brain. And we decided to update kind of the knowledge base and to take our collective viewpoints. And we had put together 20 topics that we wanted to write about. And we put together a research team to go gather all the references and research for those topics. And Brendan, we ended up with 10,000 references.
Wow.
Just over 400 made it into the book. So we spent 3 years
in the back.
Yeah. So that's just like a sliver of what we uncovered and brought forward. So we had a research team, we had a writing team working with Don and myself, and Don Campbell. Mm-hmm. And we went to some book editors and talked to them and agents, and found the right agent, and went to New York and met with publishers. And what was interesting about the book, Brendan, is we were doing something that was brand new, and we wanted to create an enhanced ebook.
Okay.
So that beyond just a paper book, and in the book there are over 100 links, URLs.
Links, for the songs and videos,
They go to sound examples and videos and research, and that was kind of a new idea. But we also wanted an electronic book that was immersive and interactive, and we had to find a publisher that kind of got that and bought into that idea of not only an ebook but an enhanced ebook. So we were interviewing publishers, for kind of their understanding and acceptance of that. And we were fortunate that several publishers wanted the book, and it went up for auction.
Huh. That's nothing better than that. Bidding war.
Yeah. So we were very pleased that we ended up with Penguin Group, and Penguin picked up the book under a very specialized imprint called Hudson Street Press.
Okay.
They got the vision for what we were trying to do. They made us rewrite the entire book.
Classic New York City publishers.
And we took the challenge and brought in a great writer to help us with the rewrite. And, that first book came out 2010 to 2011 in hardback, and an ebook, an enhanced ebook, an audio book, and then the paperback went out, and we got it published in a few other languages, and it's been a really fun project.
That's awesome. I'm getting more into the publishing space a little bit, especially with some of the clients that I'm working with, either helping them write or do book launches, and I envision myself at least doing one book. And I'm in no rush to do it yet. My excuse is I want to collect more life experience.
It's, I knew it would be a lot of work. I had no idea just how much work.
Well, you did it properly. I mean, you didn't do like a Kindle sort of PDF. You did the real deal. I want to ask you a question about the book. So there's a book, I used to work on Wall Street, and there's this infamous book called Monkey Business about two guys who are wannabe investment bankers, and they're at Wharton UPenn School of MBA, and they're interviewing, and they both land jobs at DLJ, which was a big investment bank back in the 80s, 90s. And they had this unbelievable experience of working in banking and seeing all sorts of sexual harassment and money being thrown around. And it was a really crazy, fun, entertaining read. But right in the beginning, in the prologue or one of the early pages, they co-wrote it, co-authors. And they said, 2 people writing a book is like 3 people trying to have a baby. It's one too many. And I'm curious, it sounds like you and Don had a real connection and it wasn't an issue, but I'm curious just kind of your thoughts on, if someone were to co-author a book, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's here's what I would say. Defer to the more experienced writer.
Yeah.
Don had published 21 books.
Yeah.
So that was pretty easy for me. He was my mentor.
Mm.
So he had a writing process that worked. And what his process made me a better writer. I'm a slow, methodical, perfectionistic writer. I will labor over a paragraph like you won't believe. And I didn't have that opportunity here.
Yeah.
You kind of had to move fast. You had to move furious. You had to break things and fix them later. Yeah. So I had to let go of that. I think the challenge for us was finding a voice for the book. And what you'll see as you read it is it'll be evident which chapters were primarily Don and which chapters were primarily me.
Yeah.
And sometimes that moves into first person. The chapter, I write about a lot of experiences with my family and the birth of my son and my wife's pregnancy.
Yeah.
So, the more personal things we wrote just ourselves. But I would say the advice is agree on a voice and defer to the more experienced writer in the process. And for us, that worked. And you can't be attached to an outcome.
Mm.
You just have to really accept the process and go with the process and not try to steer it in any direction.
That's great. That's really great advice. And to go into a little bit of the substance of it for the listeners out there, how would you sort of summarize kind of the high level? What is therapeutic music? What is sound healing? What can the listeners do, kind of the easy, quick steps to introduce this into their lives a little bit?
Well, I think for me, the first thing is to, my personal belief is that sound is a pillar of health, and it's an unrecognized pillar of health. And I've based my career really around sound and music and how that can help us achieve our greatest potential. And I think because we don't see it, we don't think about it, even though it's in our life. And it's not just about sound, it's about silence, because without silence, we can't perceive sound.
Yeah.
It's about the space and the notes in between. So I think the first thing is to recognize sound and silence as a presence in our life. Second, that there's healthy sound and there's toxic sound, right? So we can begin to categorize that. And what's toxic sound? Well, as we've been doing the interview, you may have picked up some background noise. And that background noise is the sound of freedom, which I'm very grateful for, because those are U.S. Air Force jets from Hill Air Force Base that's across the valley from my office that are on maneuvers. So those are F-35s and F-16s and F-18s training to protect our freedom.
Right.
I'm very grateful for that. However, the sound is very distracting and unhealthy for us, because if we're exposed to too much noise, right, too loud for too long of a duration, it has toxic effects on our health. It elevates our stress level. It can impact our hearing. So we need to be aware of the sound in our environment and look to move away from noise and to move toward more silence, to more space, to move toward nature, to have that experience of, going back to our more ancient self when we were not in this mechanized, technology-filled world where, the sounds of our planet were the sounds that nurtured us, and of animals and wind and trees and ocean and brooks. and to get more of that. To get more time in nature, or at least to listen to recordings of nature, to connect to that part of ourselves. And if you're in my favorite city in the world, which is New York, and I love Manhattan, and I'm going to be out there in a few weeks again. We've got an office there at Vital Neuro.
Yeah.
I always relish my time in Central Park, and
Yeah.
really, really enjoy the respite there.
That's
And I think that's important. But then to also recognize that the music that is in your playlist, okay, whatever that might be, is this incredible medicine that sits before you. So you have this cabinet of supplements, which is sound and is music. And you have music that can amp you up. You have music that can focus you. You have music that can calm you. And the way that we categorize that in the book is gears: first gear, second gear, third gear. First gear is low and slow. So this is music, generally instrumental music, very simple in its structure. It's not very complex. Slower tempos, generally under 50, 60 beats per minute. Something that you might enjoy when you're listening to a massage or trying to relax or go to sleep. So to have that kind of music on your playlist when you need to chill out, you need to decompress, and to be conscious of your use of that style of music. That first gear music is very conducive to managing stress after a stressful event, or to prepare for something you anticipate as being stressful. It can be incredibly useful, such as a meeting, maybe with a manager, or a difficult conversation with a spouse or a partner, to get yourself in the right kind of physical state and mental state for that. Gear 2, we move into moderate tempos, 50, 60, 70 beats per minute, more Baroque style music. So think about Bach and Corelli, for example, some Vivaldi, that is nice classical music that can allow you to focus and get into a flow state and be very present in your actions. And then when we go to third gear, that's pop and rock and roll, and more high energy, high intensity, faster tempos, more complexity, more volume dynamics going in. So if I think about my own playlist, in the music I enjoy, it crosses all musical genres, and for sure all three gears. And you, Brendan, will know what you need to go to on your playlist to change your state.
Yeah.
And we all intuitively know to do that, right? What do you want to listen to when you go on a run to motivate you? What do you want to listen when you're going to sit down and write? What are you going to listen to during your commute, right, to help you with your transition? It all comes very naturally to us, but there is kind of a science underlying that. But most important is go to what you like and go to what you enjoy.
Yeah. It's really amazing how powerful it is. Like, since reading the book, I now am consciously doing this, and I have a routine. For example, I do mirror work to connect with myself and be kind to myself. And when I wake up, part of my morning routine is the gear 1, is in my bathroom with the mirror work. Shana Knoll, she does healing therapeutic music, and I listen to that. And it puts me in that perfect state for what I need to do in the bathroom. Then I come out and I sit on my couch, and my morning routine involves having an herbal tea, doing some stretching, but then sitting on the couch and listening to Eckhart Tolle, who's an author, but he likes to call it meditative reading. So it's a little bit faster and it's a little bit more powerful. And that's like my second gear. Then I get to my desk, and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm getting ready to work, and I put on my Spotify motivation playlist, which is what I share with all my listeners and my readers. And that gets me like really fired up to work. But the coolest thing is, I was in gear 3 yesterday, and I have a trampoline over here, like for just when I get excited or releasing energy. Also, it moves the lymph around. So it's really great tool. And subconsciously, like I'm almost like I was a machine or a robot, or I was programmed. Like, once the beat per minute gets faster and faster and you're about to hit the chorus of the song, on gear 3, I then just grab the trampoline, get on, and I'm just jumping up and down. And it was like totally unplanned it was like pre-programmed. It was unbelievable how that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. You're dialed in, man.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you for that. Yeah.
Oh, and I may have looked distracted for a moment, but you mentioned Eckhart, and I just thought I'd show you what's on my Audible right now.
Power of Now.
Yeah.
That's like the best book. So Power of Now is probably my all-time favorite book. And then he has a shorter version called Practicing the Power of Now. And that audio he describes as meditative reading. And I have the workbook and the highlighters, and that's like my gear 2 jam in the mornings.
Awesome. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. So
I'm glad it's been helpful to you.
Oh, so helpful. And I just want to thank you again. And just kind of in closing, like, what would you leave our listeners with if they want to introduce some therapeutic music or this kind of sound healing into their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, at Advanced Brain Technologies, we create therapeutic music. So instead of going out and trying to cull together a playlist, you can go to us and we create downloadable music that's very accessible. You can get right on your iPod and have music for relaxation and music for focus and for peak performance. And that's all dialed in. We have a whole catalog, as well as, more specific therapeutic programs. You work with a coach that actually guides you through something called the listening program, which is a more kind of serious endeavor in terms of getting into therapeutic music and sound. But short of, working with our programs directly, read the book, and it is a plug, but it works. Essentially, everything you need to know is in Healing at the Speed of Sound. And there's, music examples and playlist examples and just a great wealth of resources to kind of dig in and get started.
I just can't.
But just start, move away from noise.
Yeah.
Be conscious about the sound in your life. Practice periods of silence, even 5. And by silence, I mean quiet, Brendan.
Yeah.
True silence is not truly obtainable, but to find quiet, to give yourself even 5 minutes of respite from sound in your environment in a quiet place, just to be present with self. I do that in the dry sauna. Is incredibly healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important, especially in a big city like New York. And one of the things I was going to share earlier is I got these Bose in-ear noise canceling headphones. And whenever I'm in public in New York, for years, I would just put them in and you hit the switch and then it goes, whoosh, you don't hear anything. And then I would play like nature music or very light white noise. And someone in the elevator in the building I used to work in saw this contraption and was very intrigued. And she asked how much they cost. And I said, oh, they're $300. And she freaked out. And I said, what is your peace and happiness and quiet and stillness worth to you? And she's like, oh, yeah, maybe I should buy it. So it just kind of,
well done.
Yeah. Trying to advocate.
We will invest in, the latest iPhone and the best, high resolution TV and everything else. But when it comes to, things that are for good self-care, we tend to skimp and we don't think about the headphones. But one recommendation, you bring it up, invest in the highest quality headphone you can afford.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's one of the best investments you can make for yourself.
Yeah, especially when you're in public and it's noisier, because you don't realize you're jacking the volume way up just to hear over stuff. And if you were in a quiet space for putting that onto your ears, think about the damage you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And don't keep the headphones in any longer than an hour at a time.
Yes, awesome.
Because your system does accommodate to that level, and it can feel comfortable, but it can actually be damaging the cilia, the hair cells.
Yeah.
In your hearing organ, the cochlea. So you want to keep it under an hour at a time, give it a break. Then that allows the middle ear muscles, which actually regulate the sound coming into your auditory system, to function better when they have some breaks from that more intensive headphone listening.
Yeah. Good advice. The cochlea is your best friend, especially as you age. If you guys want to hear as you grow old.
Yeah, once those hair cells die, they're gone, so they're precious.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Alex, I can't thank you enough for the book, for coming on the show, for sharing all this knowledge. Where can everyone find you? We're going to have show notes down
Yeah.
below and you'll send those to me. But if people want to Google you, find you on Instagram, Advanced Brain Technologies Online, what are the links?
Just go to alexdoman.com, advancedbrain.com, sleepgenius.com, vitalneuro.com. And there are social media handles, Advanced Brain, Sleep Genius, and Vital Neuro for all my companies. And then Alex Doman also on all those social channels.
Yes. And on Instagram, Alex_Doman.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming on the show.
It's a blast, Brandon. Thanks, man.